You sound good.
You sound good, Janelle.
Great, thank you.
Senator King, good to see you again.
Well, likewise. Anyway, you doing okay today?
Just fine. I think I'm shaking my little cold.
Oh, well, I'm sorry you had a cold. This is a lousy time of year to get one.
It's a little one, but it's just because I broke quarantine. I started getting social, and the next thing I know, I got a cough and a cold.
Well, it's all right. You know,
yeah, get my immune system in gear.
Yes, I think we all are going to be in that boat, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay, Susan, tell me when TVW lets us get started. We're getting right close to.
Just one. I think it's the webinar is live, so you can start whenever you would wish.
Oh, excellent. Well, I want to welcome everyone to this joint committee work session of the Labor, Commerce, and Tribal Affairs Committee of the Senate and the Labor and Workforce Standards Committee of the House. I'm Senator Kaiser, chair of the Senate Committee. Representative Sells, would you like to introduce yourself and maybe your committee members?
Well, thank you very much, Senator. I think all of the committee members are here. Our ranking member, Representative Larry Hoff, is here. The Vice Chair, Representative Liz Berry, I believe, is here. And Nick, excuse me, I need to check the participants list to make sure who is here and who isn't. I see Representative Bernosky is here. And Representative Hoff is here, I noticed, but I'm not sure if the other representatives are here. Representative Hoff, can you fill me in if I'm missing somebody here?
Gina is here.
Representative Mossbrucker is on the line, and I don't see Representative Harris yet, but I'm sure he'll join us soon. He confirmed with me that he would be here.
Thank you very much.
And I'm here too, Representative Sells. Representative Ortiz Self is here.
And Rep Harris is late, but he's here.
Thank you very much.
You have a full turnout. Representative Sells, Chair Sells, thank you so much for participating. This work session is of two parts, and Rep Sells and I agreed that I would chair the first part and he would chair the second part. And we are very honored in our first part, well, in this work session today, to have both the new Employment Security Department Commissioner Cami Feek join us, and our our auditor, Pat McCarthy, also joining us. Could I have my Senate members? I know that I have ranking member. I will just ask them to introduce themselves.
This is Curtis King, ranking member on Labor and Commerce and Tribal Affairs, and from the 14th Legislative District.
Vice Chair Steve Conway, representing the 29th Legislative District for many, many years.
And I know I saw Senator Schessler earlier.
Senator Mark Schessler, 9th District. I was here waiting for Steve Conway when he began.
John Braun, 20th Legislative District.
Excellent, excellent.
And Jane Robinson, 38th District.
And Senator Stanford, 1st District.
Well, we have a wonderful turnout of members for this important work session. I want to thank all of the participants for joining us today. It's two two big issues before us to consider. Well, more than two issues really, but many important issues for the workforce and the employer community today. So to get started, we will have the State Auditor's Office present information on their data breach and resources that are being offered to affected individuals. And I would like to start with Auditor Pat McCarthy. If you
Thank you very much, Chair Kessler. I would like to say thank you to the chairs and members of the committee. My name is Pat McCarthy and I'm your state auditor. We spoke to this committee about the Acilian data breach on March 4th. Today, we will be updating you on our progress since then. In less than 2 months since first learning of the breach, we notified more than 1.2 million people who may have been affected and offered them support. We focused on minimizing additional harm to individuals or governments, and throughout, we have worked with multiple stakeholders, WATEC, law enforcement, at the federal level and the local levels, local governments, state agencies, our Assistant Attorney General, our insurance carrier, the executive branch and the legislative branch, and others. In addition, we are working with other state agencies and local governments to implement Senate Bill 5432 to ensure efficient cooperation in data incidents. We also have created an internal data risk work group, which we will discuss later in the presentations. And I excuse me, but I forgot to mention, I have a number of staff here that are ready and willing to be able to respond to any questions you may have. JANEL Roper, who is the Director of Administrative Services for us in SAO, and our incident commander with regards to this breach, is going to provide a brief PowerPoint presentation, and we will all be ready to answer any questions that you may have. So, JANEL, you're on deck.
Right, thank you. Thank you, committee chairs and members of the committee. My name is JANEL Roper, Director of Administrative Services, and also have the pleasure of being the incident commander around this really unfortunate event that we're working through. As Auditor McCarthy mentioned, we spoke about this back in March, and so I'm going to keep the first part to a pretty high-level recap of what occurred, and then I'll go into greater detail about what we've been doing to respond to the incident since we last met in March. And next slide, please. So as all of you know, early in 2021, the State Auditor's Office was notified of a potential security event related to a third-party vendor. We had migrated away from the platform that was involved to a new secure file transfer system on January 1st, but this, unfortunately, the incident occurred prior to us being able to transfer off of that. The breach affected many governments, as well as financial and private institutions. And as you've likely seen in the media, customers that have been impacted by this have continued to come forward. So upon investigation, we identified that some of the SEO files contained personal information of people that had received unemployment benefits from the Employment Security Department. That ESD file contained information of more than 1.2 million individuals, which by far eclipsed all of the other data sets that were involved with other state and local governments. So we quickly assembled a plan to get those individuals notified, and as Auditor McCarthy put it, do no additional harm. March 12th was the last day of notifications around that large ESD claimant file. And since then, we've continued to work to identify and notify the remaining individuals. Next slide, please. So I'll move now into what we provided and what we continue to provide to support those that were affected by this. We followed best practices in our insurer recommendation in offering 12 months of complimentary credit monitoring as well as identity theft protection, and that is with the 3 major credit reporting bureaus. We stood up a call center, which is still in operation today. Calls that can't be resolved with that call center script actually are handled personally by SAO staff. They're delivered to us daily, and we take care of those situations as they occur, so we can provide that one-on-one support to any of the individuals that have concerns. We've kept our website up to date with any information around this breach, and that's out there in 14 different languages. Next slide, please. To go a little more into detail about how we notified, in addition to those emails that we sent, we are working and continue to work with one of the leading breach notification vendors. And that was through recommendation of our insurance company, as well as our Special Assistant Attorney General. There were notices placed on 3 different occasions in 5 of the statewide newspapers. As I mentioned, we continue to update our website. And then, as probably most of you have seen, there's been lots of media attention around this through TV, newspaper, and radio. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, that we first worked to notify that major population that we were dealing with, those that had received unemployment benefits. Those all were provided to those individuals the first part of March. We worked with ESD to help confirm email addresses to be able to send those notifications. And we also worked with WATEC and our vendor to ensure that the methodology for getting those emails to the right recipient was going to be solid. And in following up with our vendor, we were able to find out that 99.7% of those emails were able to be delivered to the person that it was intended to be delivered to. Next slide, please. So as for those files that were not the ESD unemployment data, we continue to work with our state and local governments to ensure we can get impacted individuals notified. This is an extremely complex situation, and I can't stress that enough. In many cases, we had to reconstruct the files that were on that transfer system. And we've had to do that on a case-by-case basis, working with each of our governments that were impacted. And in some cases, then going back to our governments to get that contact information so we can reach out to the individual that was impacted by this. Next slide, please. So we know that we have learned a lot through this, but we're really focused on looking ahead and seeing what we can do as we are implementing these data sharing agreements and working with the Senate bill that was recently passed. We have spent a lot of effort to work with these data sharing agreements for all of our local governments and state agencies and are making progress in getting those from our clients that we audit. In addition to that, as Pat mentioned, we implemented a data risk work group. And what that group does is takes a look internally at all of our processes so that we can continue to update and improve upon our policies and our practices for data sharing. That is what I have. We'd like to see if there's questions for any of us.
Yes, indeed. And just to remind everybody, you go to the participants list to raise your hand or to lower your hand to let me know that you have a question. And I do have a question, so we'll get started. It's stunning to me that you were able to send out 1.2 million emails and that 99.7% were delivered to the individuals you sent them to. That's an incredibly accurate level of email lists. I mean, seriously, I've had some experience with email lists and I get bounce backs and no longer. And so how did that happen that you had such a high deliverability level?
And there was obviously bounce backs because we weren't at 100%. But what our vendor did prior to starting the email notification was did a series of tests to ensure that those email addresses were in fact valid email addresses. The other thing they did was ramped up those efforts. So they didn't send 100,000 even the first day. They sent maybe 10,000 the first day. And then the next day they would send 25,000. But they did that in a way to prevent from being concern or an issue of those not being deliverable because of them not being a valid email that was being sent.
Yeah, I'm impressed. That's amazing. You also mentioned that March 12th was the last day of these notifications.
Correct.
But then you said you were continuing to identify and notify individuals. So what's that? I don't understand.
So March 12th is the last day for email around that large ESD file. In addition to that, we had a number of state and local governments that had files that were on that appliance during the breach. And so those ones that we continue to work through are those governments that maybe had 10 or 12 individuals that were impacted by this, or they had a couple hundred individuals that may have been impacted by this. So those are the ones that we're working through. That data wasn't available to us in a format as the ESD data was, that we could just turn and do those notifications. Those have taken a lot more care.
Right. You also said, JANEL, that some of the SAO files in the data breach contain personal information, but of the ESD files, didn't all of them have personal information, including bank account information?
There was some files that had bank account information, yes. And so every notification that went details the information that would have been included in that file for that individual.
Are we aware of any of our Washingtonians who've had their bank account hacked since this happened?
We are not aware of anything that is tied to this breach as far as information that was misused.
I know I have other hands up and I don't need to monopolize the conversation. So Representative Sells.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Kaiser. You talk about agreements with other agencies, and you sort of went over that rather quickly. What are we looking at here? One, and two, what kind of policies should we be looking at as a legislature in regard to the sharing of these kinds of information?
So I am going to see if I can.
Yeah, I was going to say, Scott, maybe you should answer kind of the work group that we've been working with.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me? Representative Sells, Senate Bill 5432 was an effort that came from the governor's office, and we worked on, along with a number of other interested parties, to try to come up with data sharing agreements and a requirement that those data sharing agreements be in place. This describes exactly in detail the relationship between two parties and how you're going to handle their data. This gives a greater reassurance to both parties and the terms and conditions of handling, so everybody knows up front. So that was a big step that the legislature just took in 2021.
Yeah, and I just, for point of clarification, this is Pat McCarthy, that, you know, we had agreements and we had a practice and a policy and a procedure for how we would share and protect people's personal information. We're government. We know a lot about your personal information, regardless of what state agency or local government we do. But this codifies it in writing, I think, for the protection of the government and the citizens that they serve as well. And so I thought it was a good step forward for all of us to do it. We were currently already using data sharing agreements with a number of state agencies, but this is going to be a Herculean effort to do all of local government. So we're talking over 2,000. So we've been working on it steadfastly, trying to get those in place.
Representative Mossberger, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, JANEL and others, for the exceptional presentation. My question's around the calls that you're getting. Have those calls diminished? And I know one of the challenges with the SD was that they had wait times, or they weren't called back, or we had these extended calls that, of course, ran over into our offices trying to help out. And so I guess I'm just wondering, how much time are they waiting? Are we receiving less calls at all the time? And again, I just really appreciate your work on this and expediency and getting this fixed.
Yeah, that's a great question. And calls have definitely decreased. The volume has decreased. We did see a little bit of an uptick when we realized that not everyone maybe paid as much attention to the deadline for getting that credit monitoring in place. And so this last week, we had a few more that credit monitoring code, they expired in the letter. It explained to them that expired on June 6th. And so June 7, you can imagine we had quite a few concerned people that called because they were no longer able to use that code. So we continue to work through those. I would say on a given day, the call center is getting between 35 and 50 calls at this point. So not a large number of calls. At the peak of it, we were probably a few hundred a day. Of those that we're getting right now, there's probably 3 to 5 of those that we need to handle differently, that we kind of put that special attention to because it's something that we may be able to provide better assistance than the call center can.
Right. And so we deployed some of our office assistants to actually do that body of work, and they did a phenomenal job.
As a follow-up, if I heard you right, you said the deadline for getting the credit report coverage was this last week, just recently. Do people that miss that deadline, are they out of luck, or do they have an option to find a way to get a credit report?
Yeah, they're not out of luck. And that's why I mentioned that is we continue to work with those individuals. In fact, Tuesday had the COO from DNR reach out to me and say, hey, I've got a couple employees that missed the deadline. And so in those cases, we're absolutely helping them and getting them a code, a unique code for them so they can sign up for that credit monitoring.
And of the 1.2 million citizens who were breached, how many asked for free credit report coverage?
I'd have to get you that exact number. I know the last check, industry standard is around 4 to 6%, which is incredibly low, I realize. And we were just about 5%. And so we were right within that, but I can get you that exact number for sure.
Thank you. Senator Conway, you have a question.
My question revolves around Extelian here. And I'm not familiar with 5432, so maybe it's covered in 5432, but it seems like Extelian has had any number of data breaches. If I look it up on the internet and see that it's subject to about 14 lawsuits from very notable companies like Kroger. And I guess what I'm interested in is whether we've learned anything about the use of these third-party suppliers here, so that we don't, the Extelian is being sued because of outdated machinery, I guess, or data processing, I guess what it is. And I'm curious, one question is, have we learned anything about these third-party providers so that the state can avoid those who have bad records? And secondly, are we involved in any lawsuit against them as well, since there's probably going to be some ongoing problems? I mean, is this data breach, as we know from working with Unemployment Insurance Commission recently, they sell this data and then it becomes part of an onslaught against other kinds of programs, okay? So I imagine the cost of this goes on for a long time, so.
Steve, I can give you the answer to the latter part of your question is we are named in a class action lawsuit by some citizens. So we are being sued. JANEL, do you want to talk a little bit about the first part of this?
Yeah, I can do that. So prior to this happening to SAO, we were not, Extelian had not been part of any data breach. Obviously that is something that we would monitor hugely to see if any of our vendors were having any kind of concern over that. Since then, a different story. And I can tell you that as an office, while we believe we have always followed best practices around how we secure vendors and how we work with our vendors, we have learned that you can never be careful enough. And we're currently in the process of working with WATAC to see how we can stand up a replacement for a Cilion, a different file transfer system, so that we can make sure that we're doing our best to keep any data that we have as secure as possible.
I don't want to interfere. I don't want to interfere here with ongoing lawsuits, but are we considering a lawsuit against them? I see all these corporations are suing them for this data breach. Are we part of any lawsuit against them as well?
We are not currently. That doesn't mean it won't happen, but right now we're not part of a lawsuit against Cilion.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Hoff, you had your hand up for a minute. Did your question get answered?
Well, Senator Conway's question was a lot deeper than mine, so I was just going to let him have the floor. But essentially, Madam Chair, thank you, and tagging on to one of your questions regarding the number of credit monitoring or individuals that have taken advantage of that. Identity restoration services are significantly more complex than simply credit monitoring. I wondered if indeed we have the numbers for that particular breakout. How many of our citizens have needed to have their identity restored?
I can find that answer, absolutely.
And I think would like to all have that answer.
Yeah.
And a kind of follow up to that, Representative Hoff, is are there any other protections that the SAO is extending to the victims of this data breach besides the 1 year of credit reporting?
No, that's what we're offering for these affected individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's working with our insurance, the state insurance coverage, to provide what we're able to provide.
Okay. It does seem, as Senator Conway said, that there's a real risk here that this identification that's been hacked and personal information that's been hacked will be held or sold and used in 2 or 3 years in some other fraud attempt. Massive fraud attempt against Target or who else? Labor and Industries. I don't know. Anyway, what can we do to not let that happen?
So I know that our legal team continues to watch for this activity. They look for any activity around those files. I know that there's still ongoing investigation. Law enforcement is still very active in looking at these Cilion breaches to see if there is any indication that that information is popping up somewhere. So to that extent, we are continuously monitoring that. I know that will go on for some time.
Thank you very much for that. Do any other members have questions? I don't see hands. I want to thank you, Auditor McCarthy, as well as JANEL and Scott and the rest of your staff that you brought forward. Stay in touch with us on this, if you would, please, as this develops. I'm glad to know that you've been so proactive in the last few months.
Yeah, I would like to just say that on a positive note, we feel like we have it's in the rear view mirror now. Now we just need to be vigilant about any internal controls, third-party vendors, all of the things that you have raised here. We have had numerous discussions with numerous different parties, including our colleagues in local governments and state agencies. Many, many governments, in fact, most governments use third-party vendors. So it is something that we need to be vigilant and make sure that we've got the right internal controls and contracts and you name it to be able to deal with these issues. Government is vulnerable, so.
Yeah, we are all vulnerable these days. We've learned that much, and it's kind of frightening to be in this position. So thank you for working with us on this and appearing today in this work session to give us an update. Very much appreciate it. And I'm going to now turn the gavel over to Representative Sells to continue the work session with the Employment Security Department.
Thank you very much, Senator. I don't have the agenda before me. If they could pop it up on the screen, it would be a little bit helpful.
Our new commissioner, Cami Feek, is the first person, I think.
No, thank you very much. We'll hear from Cami Feek. I think there was no end to frustration over the last year for both you and I and the members of our committee on dealing with unique circumstances. And we're going to be doing a lot of talking over the next several years, I would imagine, about how we can do it better. And with that, I would start with Cami Feek, the commissioner or the new commissioner of the Employment Security Department, to talk about what's been happening. And I would ask the department to talk a little bit about some recent information we had from members who serve on the JLARC committees around some standards for the Employment Security Department in continuing to try to get the backlog taken care of. So with that, we'll start with Commissioner Feek.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chair Sells, Chair Kaiser, ranking members, and members of the committee. Really appreciate the time that you've given our department today. For the record, I'm Cami Feek, and although I've had the honor to present to you several times this session, this is my first hearing as ESD's commissioner since Governor Inslee appointed me on the 9th. And I'm really both honored and humbled to get to serve in this role. And I hope you all know that as a longtime public servant, I am absolutely dedicated to seizing this unique opportunity to lead an amazing team that's committed to making really positive impacts and real progress for the people and communities across Washington. When I presented to you in January, I shared that the last 15 months have been incredibly challenging for the agency. You know, this small state agency was really unprepared to launch several new federal programs to serve thousands more weekly claims, all the while our staff were dealing with the complications that COVID-19 and the economic downturn created for their own communities and families. I promised there'd be no silver bullet, no home run solution for these circumstances, just heads down, steady, measurable progress. Today, I'm going to be presenting the first of many.
We've lost some sound here.
I've lost audio too. Cami, you've lost. Can you hear us? Oh dear, there's a technical problem. Cami, stop.
Can we ask Nick to email her, possibly? Yeah. Nick Damaris?
Yeah, I just sent her something. We'll get it fixed.
Okay. This is awful. This is a new one. It's not happened in one of our sessions yet.
We've been hacked.
We're connecting.
While we're waiting for the tech folks,
Chair Sells, I wonder if Nick Damaris from ESD can speak on some of the information, if he's able to. Apparently not.
Nick Damaris, are you there?
I am.
Should we go to the next slide?
So we've got multiple presenters that are going to be helping Cami out. I think she's trying to connect her phone audio. So why don't we move to our next update of one of our presenters, and then we'll circle back to Cami's remarks, and she'll cover the data.
That's John Snodgrass, the fraud chief.
I believe so. Let's forward to the next slide, a couple slides in until we get to the fraud update. There we go. John, are you able to jump on?
I am. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
We are. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Representative Sells and Senator Kaiser and all those on the call for allowing us to be here to speak. I wanted to provide a little bit of background about myself. I'm John Snodgrass. I'm the new fraud chief at Washington State Employment Security Department. A little bit of background on me is just that I started in February of this year. Prior to that, I have 25 years of experience in the financial industry, customer service being top of mind in where I was working. Certified anti-money laundering specialist, past president of the Northwest Fraud Investigators Association, and spent all 25 of my years working in the fraud management and anti-money laundering field. And I do see that Cami is back in. Do we want to jump back to her piece of the presentation? And I can continue after that, or whatever we would like to do.
Go ahead. Go
That's
ahead,
fine.
John. You continue on. Yeah, we'll come back to
Okay.
you. Go ahead. You started.
Okay, great. Can we go to the next slide, please? So to provide some updates on what we've been doing at ESD in the fraud division, last year was a very long year for ESD with the fraud that occurred, and some immediate focus and effort was absolutely needed in order for us to shore up our program. So we have started by implementing a formal management structure, and I'll talk a little bit about that and what their disciplines are going to be. We have daily reviews of all the incoming claims that come in to identify if there's any issues with identity, and then ongoing refinement of our fraud mitigation strategies. The areas that we chose to focus on are training and policy, and that's ensuring that we are understanding what the policies are and how they should be implemented, and then training our investigators appropriately to be able to carry those out. Of course, investigations is top of mind. We want to be able to work through claims as quickly as possible, getting good people paid, and keeping bad actors away from getting money they are not entitled to. We spent considerable time building our data analytics team, which is a key component to our fraud program. Daily reviews and understanding the numbers is absolutely critical to fraud mitigation. And then fraud operations, our last leg of the chair, and that has to do with understanding what systems are available in the industry and how we can implement those systems to further strengthen our fraud platform. So those four things are now built up and are in place and are working well. And I'll touch base on some of the results we've seen by getting these pieces in place. So next slide, please, if you don't mind. So very similar to last year, although not to the numbers that we saw last year, we did experience another fraud attack, and it began on May 6th. The circumstances of the attack were very similar to what we saw last year, and through the efforts of the agency, with all the different components we've just talked about in the previous slide, we were able to stop the fraud attack. There were roughly 20,000 identity issues created. Our filters captured the vast majority of those. We have since been able to work through those and have addressed them. And we are seeing minimal, not very noteworthy payouts on fraudulent claims. So again, all the efforts that have been put in place at the agency have definitely panned out and are working well. Next slide, please. So I wanted to touch on our ongoing efforts. What does the future look like for the fraud department at ESD? I'll start by saying that the backlog that was associated with identity issues has been brought down 95% from where it was at. A lot of significant work and time went into doing that, and we were happy to get that handled. I want to touch on that. Prevention is key, absolutely, stopping the fraud initially, but recovery is also another big area that we want to focus on and are focusing on. We have a department in place that does ongoing reach outs to financial institutions to try and attempt to get money back on any fraudulent claims that get sent out. Considerable time and effort is placed there. In addition to that, we are still continuing to track down and recover the funds from last year. So far, we've recovered $370 million of the money that was taken, and that is not the end of our efforts. We are working with the Attorney General's office to recover funds from financial institutions that may have commingled funds or may not have responded. So again, the point I'm trying to make is that our efforts are twofold. They're working on what was taken and working on the future and making sure that we are on top of recovery when fraud does occur. We are also implementing multi-factor authentication on our portal, which will assist with somebody trying to hijack a claimant's claim, and that is going in place shortly, within the next week, I believe. And there are efforts underway to implement an identity verification tool at the beginning of the claims process so that we can say that we accurately know who is actually asking ESD to file a claim. And so I think that is an important and key and critical piece to a fraud mitigation plan. Again, we do ongoing reviews of our fraudulent claims to identify gaps and learning opportunities and implementing mitigation strategies to address those when we find anything. And we are also doing ongoing identification and remediation of agency risks associated with fraud. So not just claims that we are seeing, but decisions that might be made, things that are being put in place, tools that might open us up to risk. My area is responsible for being a part of those conversations and making sure that the agency and the people of Washington are protected. With that, that concludes my portion. If there are any questions, or we can move on to the next. Thank you for the time.
I think probably the question I would have is we're seeing a large amount of work done at the federal level around identifying some of the fraud. The question would be, I guess, for the department is how much of the fraud that we experienced is that kind of fraud, and then how much of it is sort of that individual or assumed to be some kind of individual fraud to the system, and how are you dealing with that?
So, well, we are working regularly with the Department of Justice to provide them the information they need to continue to pursue these individuals and track them down. I know their efforts are focused on the specific to the fraud that occurred last year. As far as other efforts go, I would have to get back to you on that. I don't think I have a solid answer yet, but I can review that for you and get that back to you. So
we don't have a sense of where the fraud's coming from overall. You know, we can't break it down.
Well, yeah, so we can tell generally where the fraud is coming from based on the IP address that is used. But again, in a lot of cases, IP address can be masked. So it's very difficult sometimes to say that it's actually coming from a domestic location or internationally. We need, federal law enforcement help to help us track some of that down. But yeah, the criminals are definitely very creative in how they mask themselves and hide how they come into the systems.
Senator Kaiser has a question.
A kind of follow-up to your question. I guess we're trying to get at when we're not under a fraud attack by organized crime, the system of our unemployment benefits, what is sort of the ongoing average sort of a level of fraudulent claims that we deal with on a day-by-day basis?
I believe, and I might have to look up the numbers exactly for you. I don't have exact numbers, but a couple of thousand a week is probably in the ballpark of what we typically would see. But again, when we're not under a fraud attack, that is where we need to be most cautious and take that time to implement additional systems that are designed to detect the unknown. You have systems in place that are catching things that you know have come through the door before, but the bad actors are always changing their tactics, and so it's important that we start to look for new systems, which we are. That is our next step on the fraud operations model, is to identify systems that maybe work with machine learning or artificial intelligence that help us to identify things that we may not know are coming.
Senator Conway.
Yeah, I have a question. You know, it seems to me that in the last recession, in our latter part in our UI system, the fraud was limited because an employee would file a claim and an employer would confirm the claim. And that a lot of the fraud that came about was due to the fact that we started allowing claimants who themselves were the employer, self-employed, etc. So I guess what I'm needing in any analysis of fraud is how the more liberal types of benefit that we allowed during this pandemic contributed to the fraud. Because if you are a self-employed person and you just submit a claim and say, anyone could submit a claim in that if they're, and that's what probably has contributed to our fraud. And I'm just curious about how your effort addresses that issue, because under the older system, if an employee submits a claim, an employer confirms the claim.
I can jump in on this one, Senator Conway, assuming that you all can hear me. I'm sure I said some really brilliant things while my phone was dropped, but I appreciate the patience. I would say that, well, one, we were still confirming with employers, and we actually heard from a number of employers, who had employees that were filed on behalf of. So that was one of the early warning systems that we heard. And I will also just add to that this was a very sophisticated criminal ring. And so they had a lot of information about those particular individuals. And in our system and how it works in Department of Labor, they had to file a UI claim first. They had to be denied on UI to then be able to apply for PUA. So I don't, while I understand the point, I think there was complication with, the number of claims, the volume claims, and what was happening in the environment, but it wasn't strictly, I think, a result of the employer engagement piece, because employers were getting those notices and those letters, although we were trying to pay benefits as quickly as we possibly could. So it wasn't one thing, but I do really appreciate the question. And I'm hopeful we have some other, go ahead, Senator Conway, sorry.
Yeah, I guess, I know that there was a desire to pay benefits quickly, but there is also an equal desire to permit from everyone to not allow fraud. And I guess there is a system out there where they're stealing employer information, and therefore they can confirm themselves their own claims. I imagine that could happen, but I just think that to some extent we created our own problem by our what was an unfortunate situation in this state with the COVID. But we needed to, and it strikes me as odd that the old system that we had, we did not have big problems with fraud prior to this COVID.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions?
Appreciate that.
And it's something I think I would agree with Senator. I think probably the change of who was going to receive unemployment benefits, and that breakdown I think needs to be brought out so we have a little bit of understanding of whether or not what Congress did in the way of allowing unemployment benefits actually allowed a little easier access to fraud or not. And that's not something that I don't think anybody's really dealt with statistically yet, or the data is there. So with that, I'm going to go back to the report from Commissioner Feek.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If we could go back to, perfect. Thank you. We can go ahead and go to the next slide there. I'm going to just speed forward a bit here. I think it's really important to note that we have really moved forward with our priorities. And I'm going to talk about just a few things and changes that we've made, some projects we've established, and a few highlights coming out of this. We have hired more staff to reduce barriers wherever legally permissible, and we're going to continue to hire up and staff up to reduce the backlog. We found new ways to pause financial commitments from those already facing financial destitution. And we've launched new anti-fraud tools that John just talked about. So we're improving identity verification and the processes for people to be able to get served within the system. I'm gonna go ahead. I think we're a little bit behind, but if we want to move to the next slide, I'm going to talk about, for the agenda today, we have brought forward some experts within the agency to really talk about some key areas. We already heard from John Snodgrass, and although we're really most recognized for unemployment insurance, there's other critical programs we have to help Washington workers and businesses at their toughest times. So I'm pleased today to spend some time on our work to support an equitable economic recovery. Jairus Rice, our Director for Employment Connections, is here to give an update on the return to work efforts. And then Stephen Ross, our Director of Labor Market and Economic Analysis, will be here for a deeper dive into the changes in the demographics of the workforce and UI claimants. And then I'll just wrap up with a look ahead. If we go to the next slide there, last year's COVID spikes in unemployment insurance claims were absolutely dramatic and unprecedented, even compared to the Great Recession, and I know you know that. These charts represent the initial claims that have continued and ongoing from 2005 till last month, so this is very current. It's really important to note that we're still at both levels of initial and ongoing claims that rival and exceed those during the worst of the Great Recession. And during the calendar year 2020, we had over 3.2 million initial claims for unemployment benefits. This is compared to 342,307 in all of 2019. So that really is a tenfold increase from the prior year. The next slide here shows these extended timeframes at a glance from April of 2019 to May 21st of 2021. During typical times, if someone was having a challenge, they'd be able to get through on the phone within a day or two to work out issues. And throughout this crisis, that really hasn't been the case. And that is all about scale. You'll see that from February to March, there was a dramatic decrease in call volume. This is an important measure of the agency's performance as we've improved and gotten better at implementing the federal provisions. That's when the American Rescue Plan Act was put in place. And then absence of spike in calls there indicates that there was some success in our efforts to quickly launch the programs. The last thing I want to note, that answered call volumes have been relatively consistent. And we've brought in technologies to assist with the phone system. We've had new ADA and LEP lines. We've added chat options. We have callback scheduling, and we've added more staff. And I'm just going to put another plug in that we're going to increase on that front to make this even better. It's become easier to get through on the phone, but we're not stopping there. This summer, we're going to add new call lines to serve those with lack of digital access and limited technical skills. We're also working with community representatives in order to do better to inform our processes for the current ADA and LEP lines. So we're going to continue to make those better. If you click to the next slide, this slide shows the claimants that have been waiting for payment 3+ weeks. This is USDOL's standard of performance, which is why I bring it up here. As you know, paying UI benefits involves an eligibility verification process and sometimes requires law judgment. While there'll never be 100% of claims paid immediately, 86% of the claimants get paid within 7 days of their application. And as the department continues to write a large number of decisions on claimant issues, we see an average of around 18,000 appeals submitted by claimants over the first 5 months of this year. And of those appeals, the department resolves about 2/3 of them initially, with the other 1/3 being sent to OAH for resolution. If we flip to the next slide, this is our benefits paid out. And this slide really speaks to the amount of benefits that we've put in the pocket of UI claimants. From March 8th of 2021 through last week, that's over $18.8 billion of benefits through various unemployment insurance programs and federal programs. So we can go ahead and click to the next slide. I know I've shared in the past, we had National Guard join us again from March to May and had 50 Guard members. They completed over 33,000 calls, and that work resulted in returning $25 million in estimated overpayments. And although the Guard has left, the big numbers of our Guard members have left, we still have 12 that volunteered to stay on at ESD and help with additional projects through September of 2021. So we're going to go ahead and flip through the anti-fraud update and turn that on over to Jairus.
Thank you, Cami. Good afternoon, Chair Sells, Chair Kaiser, members of the committees. It's a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Jairus Rice, and I serve as ESD's Director of Employment Connections. Being my first time presenting to the committees, just a bit of background on myself. My professional career started as an intelligence analyst in the United States Marine Corps. I then spent a number of years providing operational support for both the Department of Defense and the Department of State before joining Washington State Service in 2012 with the Department of Licensing. I've been with ESD since 2014, serving as the Director of Administrative Services before being asked to serve in my current role, leading the Employment Connections Division. I'm grateful to share with the committees this afternoon how we are preparing here at ESD to support the reopening of the economy and Washingtonians returning to work. Next slide, please. Quickly, for context, I wanted to orient the committees to the structure that ESD and specifically the Employment Connections Division provides reemployment and training services within. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act directs states to establish a WHEEL one-stop system that's focused on integrating employment, education, and training services. The system is comprised of required and optional partners, and in Washington State, we call this system WorkSource. Next slide, please. The quick takeaway from this slide is that through the WHEEL structure, the reemployment and training services that ESD provides is done so in coordination and under the direction of local workforce development boards. As local economies and workforce needs are unique, these local partnerships ensure we are adapting our programs to meet those unique local workforce needs. Next slide, please. A quick review of the programs that Employment Connections administers through the WorkSource system. These programs are captured here, Wagner Pizer being the largest reemployment and training program we administer and has the broadest eligibility. We also provide services specifically for individuals and businesses impacted by trade, and we serve our nation's veterans. The Reemployment Services and Evaluation Assessment, or RESEA program, is an early intervention program aimed at providing support to those most likely to exhaust their unemployment benefits before finding new work. And we provide reemployment and training services to DSHS's TANF and SNAP recipients through the Work First and BTEP programs. Finally, our Washington Service Corps team, while not a required WIOA partner, places Service Corps members in many of our WorkSource centers to provide technology support. With the exceptions of RESEA, these programs have all been providing services to customers throughout the pandemic through virtual service delivery. RESEA was suspended shortly after the start of the pandemic, but was reinstated in January of this year. Next slide, please. In addition to our job seeker services, our staff also provides services to businesses. Typically as part of a business services team led by local workforce development boards, our staff provides support to employers to include preparing layoff avoidance strategies, providing recruitment support, and hosting job fair and hiring events. Next slide, please. Transitioning now to more specific activities we've completed recently to support the return to work effort. Between January and March of this year, we began phasing back the more than 300 staff that have transitioned to support the Unemployment Insurance Division. We've expanded our suite of virtual tools, including launching a virtual job fair platform. We're now offering more reemployment workshops virtually, and we'll be launching a statewide scheduling tool at the end of this month for customers to self-schedule appointments with WorkSource staff. We've also done a lot in coordination with local workforce boards to prepare the WorkSource centers themselves. In addition to making the appropriate physical changes to keep staff and customers safe from COVID-19, we've upgraded all of the public use technology in the centers. This includes new public Wi-Fi, new public computers in the resource rooms, printers, scanners, and fax machines, as well as new laptops in the training rooms. We've also transitioned to a new version of Microsoft software that will better protect our customers' data on these public devices. And we're training our staff to train our customers on how to use new, modern, and free tools in their job search preparation. Examples of these tools include Microsoft Online and Google Docs that will allow our customers to maintain better access to their job search materials wherever they go. Next slide, please. Our primary focus right now is on Employment Connection staff resuming in-person services to the WorkSource centers. While wanting to maintain some virtual service gains, we recognize that many of our customers will need that in-person service to meet their reemployment and training needs. Our staff have begun returning to WorkSource centers this month and are becoming familiar with the new customer flow processes and safety protocols that will ensure everyone remains healthy and safe while serving customers in the space. I'm also very happy to report that Employment Connection staff resumed providing in-person services this week in the Linwood, Joint Base Lewis McChord, and Spokane WorkSource centers. And we expect our staff will resume in-person services across all WorkSource centers over the next 4 weeks. Next slide, please. We recognize that equity is important, and we are incorporating this into our recovery plans. While the necessary data is not yet available, we are partnering with our labor market and information technology teams to enhance our system in a way that will provide meaningful data around this equity work. Within the Employment Connections Division, we're also creating work groups in coordination with our local workforce partners to specifically identify what barriers to our services might exist for the populations listed here. I appreciate the opportunity to share these efforts with the committee today, and I thank you for your time.
Great. I think if we pop to our next slide, Stephen Ross was going to give us just a little update on some workforce data.
I think probably other than probably some details around what it is you're doing, which we'll probably handle in some later hearings, there probably isn't going to be a lot of questions around what you're telling us in that particular report. You're telling us what you're going to do. It would be helpful to know specifically what that looks like.
So, sorry, Chair Sells, specifically around the workforce system and recovery or around UI?
I think probably the workforce recovery more than anything, but even under around the UI, what does it look like so that we could explain it to the average person out there that you're actually doing that's making some kind of difference?
Absolutely. I appreciate the question. Thanks for the clarification. I think on the workforce recovery side, we are absolutely working with our workforce development councils and the workforce education training board to connect our Washingtonians with paths back to reemployment services. So that's training, that's being able to, distribute dollars into those communities through our DWG grants, through our EXA program, which we've partnered with them, which is a program where we actually have voice of the customer built in on those that are experiencing poverty, and then local programs are developed to specifically meet the needs of those communities. Our role in that varies depending on which piece of that you're talking about. On the unemployment insurance side, we are very actively continuing to work along 3 very specific strategies. One is to expand our technology. So an example of that is that last week we signed a contract with Google AI to give us a much more powerful tool to be able to do our call work on the phones quicker and faster, but also to give us a really robust self-service chatbot. So that's just one example. On expanding capacity, we have completely refined how it is that we're training. We have refined our recruitment and hiring practices and implemented some new strategies, and we are staffing up. We need more people on both the intake side and the adjudication side. So in those 2 particular areas, we're going to be hiring hundreds of people to continue to work through this. And then the third area is really around equity. And those 3 strategies are working together. And although there isn't one single consolidated plan, we have a number of activities and work that we've been doing across all of those. And within that, Representative Sells, I also will flag for you that ESD agreed after the JLARC hearing to supplement the report that's required under 5193 that's due to all of you in September with a plan for improvement and to add metrics for timeliness and quality of service. And we are absolutely committed to that. And we'll use the committee's suggested metrics where we can legally do that and where that's permissible. And then we're going to develop those meaningful metrics for accountability. And where there are alternatives that are needed, we'll do that. But we are going to really publish that. We're going to continue to come have conversations with you about that. And I think that's a really important part of the plan that we have to bring visibility to this. So I don't know if that speaks to your question. I hope it does. And those are just brief examples.
Well, it does, Commissioner, to a certain extent. And I think it probably is going to rely on some oversight on our part in the next few months and in the next session around a lot more specifics on what's happening and what changes are going to take place so that we aren't looking down the road to a similar situation that we faced over the last year. So with that, I'd go to Senator Conway, then followed by Senator King. Senator Conway.
Thank you, Cami. Your previous comments relieved me of some of my questions, but I guess I noticed that we still have people, almost 10,000 people waiting 3 weeks for benefits. And I guess my question, that is of June of this year, or of this month, yeah. And I guess, what did that look like during the last recession? And I ask you, if you don't have that answer today, you can get that answer for me, because anecdotally, there's been, at least people have shared with me their frustration with your new system that was introduced prior to this recession. And that I'm not sure if, it seems to me if your new system is working well, that figure should be pretty equal. That there should have been 10,000 people back in June of 2011 or 2012 waiting, 10,000 people waiting for benefits. And I'm not sure if that was the case, because we surely didn't get the level of comments from people like we have in the latest one. And I appreciate everything you're doing. I appreciate you implementing 2193. And I know the adjudication process. Have you been able to hire more adjudicators to speed up that process?
I will first address Senator Conway. We will absolutely get back to you with that information about the comparison. Although the numbers, of course, of claims are way up this time than when the Great Recession, as a comparison in terms of what those levels are. We'll come back to you with that. And we do have a new benefit system since the Great Recession. And I think you're right. I think that would be a good metric to tell us, where that comparison is there. And so we would be happy to follow up with that. And I lost your second question. What was your second question?
On adjudicators, have we hired any more?
Adjudicators, we sure are hiring those adjudicators, and we're training them and we're getting them out there. We also just changed and are piloting an adjudication model that's based off of your bill that is about case management, but we're solving those adjudication issues in teams and really clearing those claims holistically rather than have them move to specialty areas. We've just had one group doing that, but so far we've had some really good success. So we've been listening, and I think the beginning of your conversation about the accountability and bringing back consistent updates against those metrics so we don't in the future end up in the same spot is really important, and we're totally committed to doing that. And definitely consistent with the bill. We'll have that by September, but are working on that because I think that's a really important part of the whole picture for all of you and for us.
Thank you very much. Senator King.
Thank you, Chair Sells. Cami, first off, let me publicly congratulate you on your selection as the Executive Director. I'm not sure that's the correct term, but of Employment Security. I'm very pleased to see you there. The question I have has to do with are there things and are there things you can do and are you doing them that would help control the rates, unemployment rates that our employers are going to have to pay here? Because we've done some things in this last session to try and reduce those, but we still have a long way to go. And so I'm curious whether there's anything you and your staff can do to help keep those rates down.
I appreciate that. And I really think that Jairus has talked about some of the great work that we're doing on the reemployment side of the house to help support people transitioning back to work, especially as the economy is reopening, and making sure that, the unemployment insurance program is designed to help people with transition. And of course, in this particular pandemic, we've seen a much longer sustained period where people have really needed those benefits. And so one way to help with that is really to get work with our employers and get them sourced with talent. We certainly have heard them say they can use that support and that assistance. So I think that's definitely one way that we're helping out there. We also are in the process right now of assessing and making sure that people are applying for the right benefit types. And that is a requirement of the Department of Labor, but it also helps in that if it's a federally paid benefit that someone's supposed to be on, making sure that they're on that appropriate benefit will help our state trust fund as well. And that all ties into those rates and what we need to do to keep our fund solvent and healthy. So those are the things off the top of my head. And I would certainly invite my team if they have other ideas on that one to jump in. And thank you again for the kind words about my appointment. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I think probably some data that would help deal with that question is what we did during the session to offset some of those rate increases. That would be helpful to know.
Chair Sells, can I get time for just a quick follow-up?
Yes, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to comment that what we hear from a lot of our businesses in my district, and I think I've heard it from other legislators across the state, is that our employers are having a hard time getting people to come back to work. That they have the openings, but they can't get people to come in and take the jobs, and that's concerning. And I, at some point, if it continues, we're going to have to look at, what's the reasoning behind it. I mean, people want to say, well, unemployment's too easy to get and blah, blah, blah. And nobody wants to come back to work because they're going to make more money on unemployment. I don't know if any of that's true or not, but we need to do some things to try and get our employees back to work. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kaiser. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair Sells. And Commissioner Feek, since we're in a kind of wide-ranging conversation here, I was struck, really, I was really pleased to see that since we passed Senate Bill 50,
You went on mute again.
how does this, I didn't touch a thing. It's weird. A bug. Anyway, back to the issue of premiums and increasing potential of premiums. I was very pleased to see that it is looking that now our trust fund, which was looking at going down to just having 1 month of benefits in the bank, has now got 4.7 months of benefits in the trust fund, and is at nearly $2 billion when we were projected to be at a negative rate by the end of the year. So that's very encouraging and shows a level of robustness that hopefully will mean that we won't see premium increases of any size in the near term. And I understand you're going to have some new numbers next week and be maybe making some new projections for the trust fund and the need or the no longer having a need for a federal loan. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. We had, as of June 10th, the trust fund balance was at 1.85 billion. And so it's below the 2 billion that we hit at the depth of the Great Recession, but it's that's roughly 4.64 months of reserves, which is really great. And we're really looking at our next report, which is coming out on okay, Stephen, which day is it? It is next week. So that will give us the firm update of where we're at, but it doesn't look like we are in a place where we're going to have to borrow as we once thought. At least we initially thought that we'd have to borrow and have an advance in 2021, but it doesn't look like that will happen until potentially 2022, but maybe not at all. And the June 24th will tell us that. And I think 5061 that passed under your leadership was definitely a great boost to that. And we're excited that that's how it looks. It doesn't, that federal advance or line of credit, it doesn't look like we're going to need to borrow when we thought we would. But again, on the 24th is when that comes out, and then we'll be able to know for sure what that's looking like.
Thank you very much. Representative Mossbrucker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And my honorable seatmate, Senator King, previewed the question. So we own and operate businesses, and it's true. There's so many help wanted signs out there across not only our businesses, but the state. Even Oregon, when I travel over there, there's a lot of help wanted. So Cami, my question is, are you having the same challenge? I know you're trying to hire a lot of people, or maybe you have best practices that we can do in the private sector.
I appreciate that question, Representative Mossbrucker, and I'm not sure, we're hoping we can hire up too, and we've been successful. I know I hear it consistently, and not just here in Washington State, but my peers across the nation are having the same challenge. And it's a very complex situation because, as Senator King pointed out, I don't think it's any one thing. It's not the level of unemployment, it's childcare, it's what has happened with schools. It is, we hear consistently that there are people out there that have sort of taken this last 15 months to reflect and are making career changes or figuring out how to get additional training to move into different industries. And with all of that together, it's hard to know what the secret sauce is right now. And a lot of states are trying different things. But as we talk with them and as I work with them, there isn't one emerging practice that's really cracking the code on the challenge that you just raised. And I think it's going to take a collaborative effort with us, along with our our partners in the workforce system to really figure that out. We are moving forward and will be reinstituting work search. So that will start again on July 4th, and people will have to report the week of July 11th. And that will be a nice opportunity to support people in looking for work. I will say related to that we have looked at some data, and it's been optional, and we see that about 40% of our UI claimants are doing that currently. There is also a component of refusal to work. So if an individual is offered suitable work, and this isn't new, they need to take that offer. And if they don't, and the employer reports that, we will investigate, and that may result in them being denied unemployment because they had suitable work that they were offered. We've been talking to employer communities to make sure that they understand some of those dynamics, and we'll be getting more information out about the work search being reinstituted that first week of July and how that will all come together for folks. And there's some slides forward in the presentation, but we've taken a lot of time other places, but that was one of the things that we wanted to bring up for all of you too, to just bring awareness.
Thank you.
Senator Conway. Turn on your microphone.
That little leprechaun turned it off.
Yeah.
No. I guess the question I have here, and it's a hard one, and I hope you'll provide some statistics for me on it. We have had extended benefits and regular benefits, extended benefits, and special benefits. And unemployment doesn't last forever for people. And, that's a given. And I'm having a hard time, maybe you have data on this, as to what will be happening in the labor unemployment market as people exhaust benefits. Because, some people may be exhausting benefits as well. And I'm just curious if you have data on that and numbers.
That is a great question. I don't have data for you today, but we can absolutely come back with that, because there will be so many people came on in a similar time frame. From a data perspective, we can look at that and potentially be able to project out where some of those folks might be dropping. And of course, you probably all are well aware that the additional federal benefits end in September. On the 4th of September, that will make a difference for a portion of our population as well. And that has been made pretty clear at the federal level that they aren't going to extend. But we can look into that, Senator Conway, and get back with you with actual numbers.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, I see Nick Demarest, Director of Public Affairs, is on the agenda next.
Actually, Representative, I think we are going to go to Stephen Ross, who's our labor market director, to do the workforce data update, and then I'm not here with an official role, just to be able to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ross.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for having me here, and thank you all for the time. My name is Stephen Ross. I'm the Director of Labor Market Information here at the Employment Security Department. I know we don't have a ton of time, but a super high-level introduction about me is I've filled all sorts of techie number roles in my lifetime, whether it's been an actuary, an econometrician, a statistician, and enjoy reading textbooks for a living. So I'm a numbers guy. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the workforce data that we have available. This is very high level, 5-minute presentation, but we are always available for further questions and follow up later on. So going into the overview slide. It's very high level here to talk about this recession and why it's not like any other recession that we've ever seen. From February of 2020 through May of 2020, we had almost 500,000 non-farm jobs lost here in Washington. 238,000 jobs were gained back between June of 2020 and April of 2021. So a very steep return, but not quite recovered from the 420,000 jobs that have been lost. We're still down 5.2% in terms of employment since the pandemic. We're seeing divergent unemployment trends across the state, and we are similar to how we were pre-recession, unemployment rates tracking lower than the US. Next slide. So I've been listening to a lot of the questions that have been asked from previous presenters, and there's a lot of questions comparing previous recessions to this recession. And what you can take away from this slide is the differences in slope. Recessions, every recession that we've been in, we tend to look at it and say, wow, that really shook our system. We'll never see anything like that before. We could never see anything like that before. And yet it's just managed to get worse over these last 3 recessions. So looking back at that first gray line, you'll see a fairly flat slope. So that was an easier recession on us. The Great Recession, which shook our system and our people and our state very hard, still looks like a hill compared to the mountain that we've seen here in this last year and a half at the end of the slide. A couple of key points to be gathered from the chart. Percent job losses during the recent recession were more severe and immediate than in the prior 2 recessions. From January of 2020 through May of 2020, again, 420,000 non-farm jobs were lost. Again, we've gained 238,000 of those jobs back, and employment is still down 5.2%. Next slide. Here we're looking at industry sectors, and we are comparing from February 20 to May 20, which is in blue, compared to the employment change from June 2020 to April 2021 in orange. So a pre-recession to post-recession, or where we're at now, look. By far, the industry experiencing the largest job losses during the pandemic has been the accommodation and food services sector. Travel restrictions and the closure of bars and restaurants contributed to major job losses in the sector. Between February and May of 2020, this sector was down 111,000 jobs and has regained 48,500 jobs, but is still down 62,000 jobs since February. Other industries hit particularly hard were government, education services, retail, trade, and manufacturing. In contrast, some sectors have weathered the pandemic relatively well, such as finance and insurance, information, utilities, and the industry sectors. Next slide. Unemployment rates by population group. I heard questions about equity previously, and this slide speaks a little bit to that. While job losses have been universal, it has been particularly devastating to women and people of color. The chart above illustrates the yearly rates of unemployment among the largest population groups between 2016 and 2020. The unemployment rate for women more than doubled between 2019 and 2020, going from 4% to 8%, which was a 100% increase, compared to men at 4.5% to 8.6%, which was a 91% increase, which is still drastically large. But Black or African Americans experienced the largest increase over the year, going from an unemployment rate of 4.2% in 2019 to 12.7% in 2020, which is a 202% year-over-year increase. The economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 outbreak has substantial implications for gender equality, both during the downturn and the subsequent recovery, compared to regular recessions, which tend to affect men's employment more severely than women's employment. The employment drop related to social distancing measure has a large impact on sectors with high female employment shares. In addition, closure of schools and daycare centers have massively increased childcare needs, which has a particularly large impact on working mothers. Next slide, and our last slide of numbers for you all here, is a look over time of unemployment insurance continued claims by week. A larger share of women have been receiving UI benefits than men during this pandemic. As of May 22nd, 2021, 54% of our unemployment insurance continued claims for all types, regular, PUA, and PEUC, were from female claimants. And the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted demographic groups disparately. Although all demographic groups were affected, persons identifying as Black or Hispanic and younger workers generally experienced relatively high peaks in unemployment and relatively steep declines in labor force participation over the course of this pandemic. Again, these are just some very high level numbers to give you all sort of a state of the workforce, but we have tons of content out there, not only on our website, but available for you all as needed.
Thank you. Senator Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve and I love graphs. Thank you. I am looking on this last graph, and it looks to me like the federal benefits, the PUA and PEUC programs, have become really the large majority of the unemployment insurance that's being paid out, if I'm looking at this correctly. And that means that's federal dollars too, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Can you actually break that down to specific numbers? If we ask for that information on the different programs, what PUA and which is PEUC?
Yeah, we could actually take this graph and put some labels to the numbers for you all and send it back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? I think we're at the end of the presentation at this point. And I'm going to turn this back over to Senator Kaiser to wrap this up.
Taking myself off mute is the hardest part of this these days. Thank you so much, everybody, all the participants, all the members, all the incredible information that was shared with us today. I will continue to do these work sessions and explore how the recovery develops. And I appreciate you being so forthright with the information today. I want to thank Representative Sells for joining us and becoming a sort of a joint project here with all the members from the House joining us as well. So it was very useful information. I believe that it's also reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. I also wanted to add, I noticed Senator Saldana and Senator Robinson joined us for this session. Thank them for being here also. So with that, Senator, I think we are wrapped up.
So we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Bob.